think so.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite topics, as you know, and it's also a hobby, so I can go on for a long time. Last night, in order to keep it simple, I thought I would just develop a few major points, and then as I was waiting for you to assemble, I kept adding points. So I came up with a rather complete outline, and I'm not going to use all of it, and you've already seen the letter about my work in the Army, so I will just touch on that and make some additions. First of all, I have a hearing disability, and this week I've been getting it corrected, and I was going to use this conference as a debut for the use of the hearing aids. But I found out that nothing is easy for me mechanically, and putting them in and out was the chief obstacle. So I'm going to do this presentation and our interaction without the hearing aids. But I wanted you to know, and if I'm talking too loud or if I'm talking too softly, as you know, people with hearing disabilities are inclined to be too loud or too soft. So please let me know if I'm not coming through or if I'm coming through too loudly. And the points that I want to cover, I mentioned to Chris, and when he first invited me, he wanted me to speak as an activist for peace. In thinking about it, since your invitation, which I appreciated, I decided that I prefer advocacy for peace rather than activism, because advocacy, to me, as a social worker, is more positive, and it includes all the nuances of the process. So I'm speaking as an advocate, and that was one of the points I wanted to make in introducing the rest of the material. What I call Chapter 1, which I'm not going to dwell on, but it's part of the background of what I call Active Chapter 2, and that's about the program at San Antonio, where I served in non-combatant capacity as a psychiatric social worker in the first unit that I know of in the military. And I have just read, since we set up this meeting, that program is still in existence. And I'm going to circulate to you some reprints of articles in which the program is mentioned, where the sergeant who left the service on his own because he was unhappy with the military, that's how he, Bergdahl was his name. And I have some clippings about that. But anyway, I was glad to see that the unit that we developed from scratch, we had no model. And that's how I was recruited as a psychiatric social worker, as a non-combatant, even though I went in as a medic And I am convinced that if I had gone in as a medic, which I'll mention, I would not be here, because the survival of medics was in the 90% percentile, and for objectors to war, it was even higher, because the medics who were objectors were unarmed.
So the casualty rate, you said, was 90%.
Up to 90%.
Up to 90%. Okay.
But I'm saying that for war protesters, it was even higher.
Wow.
Because they were unarmed.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying, as a sub-theme, I call this presentation, Give Peace a Chance. Give Peace a Chance. And as a subtitle, Social Work Saved My Life. When they found out I was a psychiatric social worker, that's how I was assigned to the unit in Texas at Brooke Hospital. And I understand from Professor Benson that Camp Barclay is no longer in existence, but Brooke Hospital is. It's a very famous convalescent hospital. So that's what I'm going to mention in more detail as part of Chapter 2. Chapter 1, which I'm not going to detail, was I'll call alternatives to military service. And this is something that peace studies should research. If there's a student who would be interested, the historic peace churches, 3, the Mennonites, the Church of the Brethren, and the Quakers. Friends, the Quakers are better known for their pacifism, the Mennonites less, and the Brethren least of all, although the first peace studies program was started in a Brethren college, North Manchester College. Have you heard about that? That's something that one of your students should research. The alternatives to military service, which was brilliantly organized by the 3 peace churches and the military, and to negotiate with the military about such a delicate topic was no easy task. But they did it successfully, and they set up alternative services. Many of them were in state hospitals, which were sadly and badly understaffed throughout the country. Patients were warehoused. They were stacked. They were there for life. And one of the most successful pieces of social work I ever did in my life was in alternative service at Newtown, which became the site of a massacre a year or more ago. Not at the hospital, but Newtown was the nearest town. I got out a man a patient who was warehoused for 20 years. And I became known among patients, warehoused or othered, as the guy who got people out. And this guy, this patient, who was a thoroughly obnoxious guy, personality-wise, and I can see why he was a problem. He was also a gambler, and every time, well, he was a specialty baker, an immigrant, excellent baker, and he was exploited by the hospital. So when they had a special occasion, they recruited him to produce the delicacies, the pastries. And they exploited him for 20 years. When I went in as one of the first trained social workers in this hospital, graduate trained, I became known, as I said, to the patient group. Reiman is the guy who gets you out. And this guy, and he had freedom of the grounds. He was obnoxious, but not impossible. He came up to me and said in a loud voice, "Reiman, I want you to get me out of this damn hospital." And I said, "Well, come into the office and we'll talk about it." And he told me about his specialty and where he would like to work in Bridgeport, which was 20 miles away. He knew the place, and he had talked with the owner, and the owner had said, "If you can get out of the hospital, I would like to hire you." So as a social worker, first I talked with him so that we could develop a working relationship rather than just, "Hey, Reiman," kind. So I checked with the owner of the pastry shop. It was Grandma's Cookie Jar. And I won't reveal this guy's name to protect the confidentiality of him as a patient. But the clinic director, when I approached her, a woman psychiatrist, very good, I said, "What's this guy doing in here?" And she said, "Well, we've tried him out on furlough innumerable times, and he always comes back. But he was placed outside the hospital under his wife's supervision. In addition to his being obnoxious, he was also a gambler. So the first thing he would do, you could come in here, Carol."
Okay. I'm fine.
The first thing he would do when he got out on furlough, he would blow his wad of cash wherever he got it, I guess from his wife, and she would bring him back to the hospital. And this went on for years. And in my naivety, but as a good social worker, I said to the clinic director, "Why does he have to be under his wife's supervision?" They hated one another. And even with that feeling, she was not a good supervisor. And the clinic director said, well, it seemed the logical thing to do, that he should be under supervision, at least while he is on furlough from this hospital, Newtown State Hospital, Fairfield State Hospital. So I said, well, would you let me see if it will work out? And at that time, I was going through the agonizing decision of going into the Army as a non-combatant social worker. I said, I will not kill, but I will serve in a helping capacity. That's how I was first assigned during the induction process. The classification at that time was 1AO, social worker, non-combatant. And that's how I got assigned to Brook Convalescent Hospital. And I'll tell you more about that. That's alternative service. And this should be researched because there were hundreds of conscientious objectors who were assigned to state hospitals because of this agreement between the three peace churches and the military. It was a brilliant piece of work under the most difficult circumstances while we were in the first draft. And they worked this out. So there were hundreds of objectors who were assigned to state hospitals all over the country where they had been, as we called it, warehoused, just stacked. They were fed and clothed, not well, but that's all. They got no treatment.
What year was this? Or
What-
what years? Like a time frame?
What's that?
What year was this all happening? Like,
Alternative services began when World War II broke out during the recruitment processes. And that's how soldiers, potential soldiers who objected to war conscientiously, that's how they got assigned. And that's how I was assigned, first of all, as a medic. And as I said, if I had been assigned as a medic, I wouldn't be talking with you now. I would be dead. But that's how I got assigned to this demonstration unit at Brook Convalescent Hospital, which became a model of treatment throughout the country. We had, we were supposed to have a capacity of 1,200 patients, but we were always overloaded. But as social workers, each one of us was assigned to a barracks which were attached to the convalescent hospital. They were former CCC barracks that the hospital had taken over for treatment of social work, of patients who didn't need to be in the hospital. In fact, the hospital confinement was detrimental to their recovery. So we had a social worker assigned to to each barrack. And when I was there, during this model demonstration, we had 12 social workers working under a psychiatrist, and we had a team of psychologists plus occupational therapy and all the therapies that you could think of at our disposal. It was an excellent hospital. It was not an army post, it was more like a country club with all of these facilities, plus the neuropsychiatric unit, which I was assigned to when they found out I was the psychiatric social worker. And the way that came about, during my basic training as a medic, and we did this, a part of it, with the infantry. So we went through, other than the armed part of it, all the conditioning, the physical conditioning that the infantry went through. So as a medic, we would hike for 30 to 50 miles with a backpack full of medical equipment. It was like a walking drugstore. And I wore out a pair of shoes, the soles of the shoes, in 3 weeks, just from the hikes. And the super conditioning, the baptism of fire, was to slither on your belly through barbed wire in the mud with bullets whizzing back and forth from a machine gun. And the rumor was, but you should never listen to rumors, the rumor was these were real bullets. So if you got your ass up in the air, bang, you would be dead. But we did that for 100 yards with the infantry as part of the baptism of fire. The way I got into the psychiatric unit as a social worker was this. We were out on final training, basic medic training.
What year would you say this is? This was?
This was 44 and 45.
Okay.
19. As we were completing the 11 weeks of basic medical training as a medic, as we were packing up our gear, and here's where rumor comes in. This was at the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, which was the worst battle in World War II. The rumor was that we, as medics, would be accompanying infantry in the Battle of the Bulge, which is another reason, as a medic, I would not be here talking to you now. I would be gone. Well, the way this happened, on the final night of basic training as a medic, the sergeant, first sergeant came out, said, "Reiman, pack up your gear." you're going to Brook Hospital in San Antonio. And without any explanation, even if he knew why I was going to Brook Hospital, that's all he said. And I thought to myself, as I was packing up my gear and eating my sea ration over an illegal fire, they were more palatable. Well, he said, Reiman, you're going to Brook Hospital. And I thought, well, my God, have I come down with some strange disease during training that I don't know anything about? So I didn't know until I got to Brook Hospital that I would be assigned as a psychiatric social worker. So that's why, as a sub-theme, in addition to my major theme for this presentation, Give Peace a Chance, the sub-theme was Social Work Saved My Life. And that's how it happened. And you were wondering how long I was going to go on. Well, this meeting was delayed several times, and I apologize to Chris for being patient with me. I had some things that came up that I couldn't handle and put my heart and soul into this presentation. I was glad for the opportunity, but this was an important time in my life when I had to make critical decisions about war and peace. And that's how I came on this theme. And I can't claim originality, but as a soundbite, I thought it would be good to call this Give Peace a Chance. And it's particularly timely because of what's going on in the world around us. We're about to crash as a universe. But while we were waiting for the meeting to happen, I kept reading and picking up reprints, which I'll circulate to you. And in this morning's Tribune, a recent survey revealed that 75% of USA population is opposed to war as a solution to these global problems. But the hawks, and you know what I'm talking about, I'll name a few of the hawks, want to take us back into Afghanistan. They want to take us back to Iraq, because we never really settled those conflicts to their satisfaction. And I'll name a few. Paul Wolfowitz. Do you remember hearing about him? He was the assistant to Cheney, the vice president, former. And Cheney was the front man for our going into Iraq. Wolfowitz was the architect behind Cheney who arranged for our involvement in Iraq. The other man, recently in the news, unfortunately, is the madman from Texas, Ted Cruz. You remember reading about him? I'll just say madman. I could say worse things about him. But he is all for our staying in Afghanistan, going back to Iraq to, quote, settle what we started off to do before we discovered that they had no weapons of mass destruction or medical supplies for mass destruction as our excuse for getting involved in Iraq. And that's why I came on this theme. Before we get re-entangled in this and other conflicts, as the peacemaker of the world, this theme, give peace a chance. And my sub-theme is social work saved my life. And with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks, and you may use the facilities, take a little break, and we'll reassemble, I hope, to talk about how peace studies can be more involved in Friends of Peace Studies in the here and now. What we can do about giving peace a chance other than academic study and publication.
You want to just pause and then we'll kind of read.
I did, as a social worker, assigned to 35 or 40 patients. I lived with my patients. I had a little office, which was not very private. The best counseling I did as a social worker was when they would come back roaring drunk from downtown San Antonio and come beating on my door when I had been urging them to talk, to get this out of your head. But you have to talk about it. But they would come to my door and say, Reiman, we want to talk. So this could be one guy, 3 guys, 6 guys banging my door at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Dwight, I hate to interrupt you, but I'd love to get this on camera. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that after we start up
Sure.
the camera again? Because I'd love. Okay.
I hadn't experienced what thousands of people were experiencing as part of their military experience. And I thought that as a social worker, if I were to establish empathy in quality with patients, I would need to experience, without killing, what hundreds of thousands of people were going through. That was part of my rationale.
Okay. So,
And as I said, I appeared before 2 draft boards.
Okay.
And other than a few, and I won't name them for the record, I would just call them smart asses. The draft boards were very understanding and supportive of my decision when I had an opportunity to explain my opposition to war. So I would say a few, other than a few smartasses. And I won't name the discipline, and certainly not the people.
can you give us a sense of what you explained to the draft board? Why you decided to be a non-combatant for World War II, which was a relatively
Because
uncommon.
as a social worker, I've been trained, especially with graduate training, but throughout my undergraduate studies, I majored in sociology. War was incompatible with that philosophy. I grew up as a member of the Church of the Brethren, which was one of the historic peace churches. And as I said, they established at North Manchester College, a Brethren college, the first peace studies program in the USA. That's something that should be researched by peace studies and written up, as well as the extent, the volume of COs who served in alternative services during WW2. We don't have those figures, but they are available if somebody looks for them, I'm sure. But anyway, is that enough about the philosophy?
Sure.
Well, first of all, and I never tried to exploit my membership as a member of the Church of the Brethren. I am now a Unitarian Universalist. I never tried to exploit that, and I tried to have the draft boards, both of them, understand I'm not using this as a crutch for you to assign me as a war objector. But this is part of my, I can't deny the fact that I was originally a member of the Church of the Brethren, and they were not Bible-thumping people or flag-waving people or Bible-waving people. But I tried to make their task more difficult. What other things were happening in your life and your development that made you a war resistor? So it was originally part of my early life, but as I studied, both as an undergraduate and as a graduate, this became a compatible philosophy of living, of which killing is not a part. And part of my activism some years ago, they were trying to introduce ROTC into the high schools. As an activist, I appeared before the Board of Education in Columbia and said, this is wrong. If they want to make that decision, please wait until they're in college and not introduce this as an option when they are quite immature as high school students and not ready to make such a decision.
You're talking about ROTC there?
They wanted to introduce ROTC,
Yeah, ROTC, yes.
in the high
Or like writing, or going to the school board and protesting. Do they work together, do you think, or is one more powerful than the other in order to promote peace?
Oh, well, peace-minded people are always a very small minority around any issue related to war. So we are always in the minority.
So what is most effective then to get the message of peace to people? Is it through writing, activism, or both?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Activism, advocacy, I'm not ruling out
Right.
activism at all. I'm just saying my personal preference in relation to me as a peace person is as an advocate for peace. Give peace a chance. And we haven't given peace a chance. And we haven't given, most people don't know about alternative services. That they can make a choice, they have to understand. And this is something that peace studies should be involved in.
Were you also?
I made
Go ahead.
well, I mentioned an audio, but this was a full-length movie, and this is about community mental health. This is about a culture of mental health. This was made into an audio, one of the highlights of my rich professional life, and it has been rich, was to be asked to come to Hollywood to help produce a full-length movie on community mental health. And I was to help with the recruitment of actors and to see whether what they are portraying is accurate in the community mental health field. And Eddie Albert was the hero. He was the editor. Part of this was documentary, part of it was fiction. But he, as part of the fiction, was the editor of the newspaper where this was occurring. They came to us. This was what I did in Texas, helping communities to organize community mental health services.
Was that your work in Austin?
I was first with the Division of Mental Health
Yeah.
in the State Health Department.
Mhm.
And then that program was transferred to the Department of Mental Health and Retardation.
Mhm.
And I was there until I came to Missouri.
I see.
But my son, who is much more technically skilled, this movie, by the way, should be in the university library, community mental health. But my son said, you know, film deteriorates. We should put this on audio. So he did a little editing job and converted it to I guess it's a 30-minute audio. But the film is cleared, and as I say, community mental health should be in the university library. We, and this is part of the many things I did in Missouri, I reviewed all the films that touched on mental health, and I developed a bibliography of films. But
What year was the movie made?
but the film,
No.
if it's still in the library,
No.
we became the library for both the Missouri Department of Health and the university. But the film is called Community Mental Health, and that has all the clearances. This is just my copy, and I would have to get releases for this to be used publicly.
Yeah.
What year was that done?
The film?
Yeah.
The film was produced about 1960.
Okay.
And we have 14 copies placed in the university film library. And you can check this out, whether it is, I have it, whether it is still in the library. The film is called Community Mental Health. This is just an audio version of a portion of the film. But anyway, Eddie Albert was the newspaper editor hero who helped to organize the effort of this fictitious community around which this film was developed. That's why I say part of it is documentary and part of it is fiction. For the documentary parts, when we used social workers, we used real live social workers, like in child welfare and in public health, we used public health nurses. But the fiction of which Eddie Albert was a part and Ruth Story was the heroine. She was the go-getter type woman who went around rounding up money and rounding up people to get the community organization task done. But that was played by Ruth Story, who was, at that time, both of them, most people are dead that I knew, both professionals and friends. Most of them are dead. Here at 96, I'm way beyond my time. But anyway, Ruth Story, who was the go-getter woman, but she, in real life, was the wife of Richard Conte. Do you remember him?
Sorry.
He was a character actor.
I do.
Do you remember him?
Yes.
Ruth Story was his wife. And when I was helping to make this film in Hollywood, she was appearing at the Hollywood Community Theater in A View from the Bridge. And when I first met her, I had gone to see A View from the Bridge because I didn't have much opportunity to get acquainted with the actors and the actresses. And when I heard that she was appearing in A View from the Bridge, I purposely went to see it. And when I first met her during the production of Community Mental Health, she said, "Well, why did you do that?" And I said, I gave her a hug and a little kiss on the cheek. And I said, first of all, I wanted to, and secondly, if I was going to appear with you in a film, and by the way, I played the role of the mental health consultant from the State Department who helped communities organize community mental health services. And so I said, first of all, because I wanted to, and because it's a way I can get acquainted with you a little bit if we're going to be working together in the production of a film.
Now, I gotta switch out this memory card real quick.
Okay.
We're good?
So the question that was asked is, how does mental health relate to pacifism, and how are those two goals related?
War does not respect people. It kills people. And all the military apparatus that supports war is inconsistent with mental health principles. And I could go on at great length about what they are, but you don't want to hear that.
No, feel free. Go ahead.
Yeah.
The philosophy of war and the philosophy of mental health are totally incompatible. And the development of the personality, which is restricted by the military and by military service, is inconsistent with the development of a healthy personality. And we could go on for a semester about that.
Based upon your experience at the convalescent hospital, how would you say, how does combat affect the development of personality? Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience working with troops suffering from what was referred at the time combat fatigue and
I'll have to
PTSD?
Use part of my letter.
Okay, sure.
I have a caseload of about, when I said 35, that was the max. But sometimes we would have drop-in patients, so we would have up to 60 patients under our social work care, but only about 30 to 35 lived in the barracks where I lived and where 12 other social workers lived. I have a caseload of about 35 soldiers, nearly all of them overseas men and suffering with battle fatigue, combat nerves, these were terms we used then, neurophysical exhaustion, or whatever you want to label it. Now we label it PTSD.
Yeah.
But one of our contributions was to respect the individuality of people and the varied circumstances under which they served. They are not crazy in any sense of the word, and most of them were pretty normal individuals before entering combat. Anyway, it's simply that they just got to the point where they could take no more war. Their symptoms vary from the extreme conversion hysteria you know about conversion hysteria, where they use the loss, where they lose the use of a limb, an arm or a leg or other parts of the body, not because of physical damage, but because of PS, whatever you want to call it. Their symptoms vary from extreme conversion hysteria, ones where they lose partial or complete command of a limb, even though there is no physical injury, to the less serious ones who are just very nervous and jittery. Some, of course, have been wounded, but the physical picture in these cases has been cleared up, and our job was to help rehabilitate them emotionally. Some are fresh out of battle, while others have been in hospitals. This was the hospital curse. They were up to a series of hospitals for a year or more. And that's why the barracks kind of treatment, with the ready availability of a therapist, individual or group, was so important. Early intervention into their disability before they had accumulated all the curses of hospitalization. It would be difficult to describe the whole process of treatment on paper, so I'll give you just something of a brief outline. And I gave you the composition and the administrative arrangement in the barracks. The soldier patients remain here for approximately 6 weeks, and then we would get a new cycle of patients, depending on how quickly they respond. Very few are sent back to duty, and most are discharged directly to civilian life from here. One of my personal conflicts, am I helping getting you ready to combat duty, which treated you so badly? Am I contributing to their recovery so that they can go back to combat? That was a personal conflict that I tried to handle in a professional way. 3 times weekly, we conduct group psychotherapy discussions on such topics as effect of fear and anger on the body, organization of the personality, these are the topics, combat nerves, returning to civilian life, etc. That's an overview of some of the topics that we made kind of a informal, formal presentation as a way of stimulating discussion. The old and new psychiatry, and I'll give you a copy of the New Yorker with the article I mentioned about the new and the old psychiatry. The old psychiatry said, just forget about it. You don't need to talk about it. The new psychiatry said, it's like a boil. If the boil goes untreated and it festers, it grows and grows, and until you punch a hole to get out the pus, there's no recovery. So, in order to get rid of this bad clutter in your head from the war experience, you've got to talk about it. So when they'd come in drunk, they could talk freely. And I always said, as gently as I could, I want to talk with you about this some more. And we would set up appointments when they would come in individually to talk with me. What did this mean to you personally? And how did you handle it? Of course, one of the most frequently asked questions pounding on my door, when am I going to get my discharge? And this sometimes is asked through my door before I'm even out of bed in the morning. There are obviously some disadvantages to living so close to one's patients. There were advantages, but certainly disadvantages to the therapist. We confer frequently with the psychiatrist so that the psychiatrist has a pretty clear picture of the patient when he sees him from time to time. We confer frequently with the psychiatrist and mutually plan the best approach for the patient's emotional rehabilitation. But all in all, we have a good program, and we do get some amazing results. The Army, as far as this unit is concerned, has really done a bang-up job in trying to help these returning soldiers that we had the opportunity to work with. Whether this unit is typical of others throughout the country, I don't know. And this is where peace studies, through a student, should investigate how voluminous was the use of war objectors throughout the country. What volume somewhere there is a listing of hospitals where this was carried out. I gave you one example. Whether this unit is typical of others throughout the country, I don't know. And that's why I said we've done a lousy job of recording good things that were done for patients' emotional rehabilitation 70 years ago. But where are you going to go to read about that? And that's where peace studies comes in, and the use of students to do the research. I don't have the resources to do the research or the time. I wish I did. Well, then I talked about the availability of other therapies, of which Brooke Hospital generally had access to, and as far as I know, Brooke Hospital still exists, even though Fort Sam may not. But Brooke Hospital, I think,
Yeah.
still exists, because it
I
was
think
a
they call
model.
it Brooke Army Medical Center or something like that.
Yeah.
It's still there in the same location, I think.
Uh,
Much more developed.
Brooke Convalescent, if you want to put this down for your students' use, Brooke Convalescent Hospital, N period, P period, section, T dash 1200, company D2, Annex 4, Fort Sam Houston, Texas. So any researcher would be able to use that data to get further information. So what I've been telling you about happened in 44 and 45, a long time ago.
So did this experience at Brooke Hospital stimulate your involvement in the peace movement later in life, and your professional engagement with peace advocacy? Did it grow out of this experience at Brooke?
Well, partly, sure, but my whole life,
But you had already been involved.
I've been an advocate for peace all my life,
And that came out of your
starting
Church of the Brethren
Church of the
upbringing?
Brethren.
Yeah.
And as I said, Church of the Brethren at North Manchester College in Indiana started the first peace studies program
Mhm.
in this country.
Yeah.
So everything that's happened that I've been talking about, plus all of my professional development as an undergrad in sociology and as a graduate social worker,
Yeah.
has fed into this philosophy.
Had you already done graduate work in social work before you were inducted into the Army?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's how it saved my life.
Yeah. What degree had you finished already?
Master's.
Okay. So then you were ready to go
That
on.
was on my paper
Yeah.
that they had at the induction center,
Yeah.
which was in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
the first one, and the second in New Haven. All of that was in my records.
Yeah.
But they didn't make that available
Mhm.
to the people I worked with at the hospital.
Mhm.
Nor did they make it available to non-commissioned officers, like the one I mentioned, said,
Yeah.
"Hey, Reiman, you're going to Brook Convalescent Hospital."
Yeah.
And I should have said, "What for?"
Then, what after that? After you worked at Brook, what experiences in later life further committed you to peace activism or peace advocacy?
Well, I've been in social work all my professional life,
Yeah.
as a clinician, as a supervisor, as an administrator, on the faculty here for 16 years in the School of Social Work.
Yes.
And my work was mostly in extension, taking the campus to the community.
Yes.
That was my assignment at the School of Social Work. So
Was that part of?
what I did, I developed several $1 million worth of grants through the National Institute of Mental Health that I used in 2 3-year projects here at the university as part of my assignment on staff board collaboration in community mental health services. How can professional staff work more effectively with board members?
Now, this is staff of the School of Social Work, or
This was in community
The
mental
community
health
mental health
centers
units,
where
okay.
they existed.
okay, so you have
And there was
professional
there
staff. and-
still is
yeah.
a big gulf between staff and board.
Yeah.
They
okay.
don't work well together.
Yeah.
And we learned a great deal, and I don't have it for showing. I developed 2 300-plus page reports on how staff and board and community can work together more effectively. And that was carefully researched.
Yeah.
Not by me, but by research staff.
Yeah.
I'm not a researcher. I just respect it, support it.
Yeah. So people working with you did studies, observations of field work, or
Well, we
observance of
did-
meetings, or
And I have copies of these reports. I didn't get them out,
Mhm.
but they're available through the School
Yeah.
of Social Work.
Okay.
They should be. Ask about them.
Okay.
Ask about Reiman's studies on staff
Yeah.
board and community involvement and community mental health services, as well as the film library, community mental health. Did that answer your?
Yes.
For those,
So we did the first project, and I did it in a small pilot way. I didn't want it to be overwhelming. For the facilities, for the communities, or for me, I did it first in East Missouri with, I think, 6 community mental health centers, the state hospital, and then we did it with a similar grouping in West Missouri.
Mhm. Okay.
But those reports should be available through the school. If they're not, I probably can find copies. one of the highlights of my professional life, since you asked, I did a text
Oh, good.
called Strategies in Social Work Consultation. And it's subheading in the field of mental health.
Uh-huh.
This was published, it's now out of print. And, while I think of it, here are the references, the clippings that I was referring to.
Okay.
Which you can take a hasty glance at.
Dwight, for those who may not be familiar with social work as a field or discipline, can you tell us a little bit about some of the main tenets and how they relate to mental health and pacifism?
You're talking about the semester. Well, first of all, again, respect for the individual. That we're all a product of what we come into the world with and what happens, everything to us after birth. Every life experience, our relationship with parents, with siblings, with colleagues, that's all part of the development of the personality which we bring to the school of social work for refinement. All of the other things are related, but which come to us in other ways, through undergraduate studies, through life experiences, which we bring to graduate training. In a nutshell, you're asking a semester's worth of response.
Did you feel this point of view within social work was compatible with your religious views as well?
Well, as I said, I was a member
Yeah.
of one of the historic
Well,
peace churches.
I mean, in later life, you were no longer
I
brethren, but
can't shut that out,
Yeah.
nor do I want to.
yeah,
This was what I lived with
yeah,
before I went to college.
Yeah.
I was a member of the Church of the Brethren. They
Yeah.
were not
yeah,
Bible-thumping people
yeah,
or evangelistic type people.
yeah.
They were modest, loving, compassionate people. They were, I come from a farming family in the township of Brothers Valley
No, Brothers Valley, yeah.
in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I have a clipping out on the board.
Yeah.
They show as part of, I forget, maybe Vox, but it's on the board, of an artist's view, a weekly view of a local artist. Last week I discovered the artist was from Somerset, Pennsylvania, 10 miles from the little community where I grew up. His name is Schaefer. He's on the refrigerator.
And then later you've been a Unitarian Universalist. That you feel that also is compatible with your peace advocacy?
Oh, yes, very. I didn't know anything about Unitarianism until I came to Columbia, Missouri.
Austin, right?
Austin, I was introduced to it
No, I see.
by a faculty member at the School of Social Work. Unitarianism.
Now, can you talk a little bit about how the principles of Unitarianism fit into your peace interest? Or that's another.
Isn't that how you met Mom, Dad?
What's that?
Didn't you and Mom meet at a...
No, my wife, who's been dead since 1980,
2000.
was a Quaker, a birthright Quaker. So I got acquainted with her in graduate school, social work graduate school. So the Quakers and the Brethren were very close. But as I say, the Quakers are much better known, both for their pacifism and other religious beliefs. So I would say it's a combination of intelligence, compassion, creativity, the use of the person for constructive purposes. And that's why Unitarianism and advocacy for peace are so compatible. I found there is a church which is supportive of what you're talking about. So, have you met the new minister there, by the way?
No, I have not. No.
She's delightful.
No.
She came to visit me a few weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
We had a great talk.
Yeah, that's good.
One of the things we talked about in the newsletter, they have a quality newsletter, her articles and her sermons and other references to her, she signs off as Reverend Molly. Her name is Molly Houston. I said, well, I like Pastor Molly better than Reverend because that seems a little closer to the people. The Reverend always, to me, smacks a little bit of elitism.
Yeah.
It's above people, whereas pastor, to me, conveys more of the caregiving
Yes.
that the church provides.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Can you tell us, or can you recall any specific incidents when you were working with the troops? Any personal stories? Of course, protecting confidentiality, but can you tell us any aspects about working with them individually?
Well, one of my questions when I became a part of the military, how would my non-combatant status as an unarmed soldier, how would regular soldiers react to this? And I found that soldiers' reaction was much more supportive and congenial and all the other good things than the population generally. One of the things that they feared during our contact in the rehabilitation process was, how will I be accepted in the community? Do they see this, my disability, as a matter of cowardice or evasion? And specifically, how will my attitudes about race be accepted at home? At that time, even though it was long before don't tell, don't explain, just keep it to yourself. It's before we developed much more tolerant attitudes, race. And they found that as a soldier, this kind of philosophy of acceptance, regardless of race, was much more prevalent among the military personnel than it was back home. And this came out in group therapy, in individual therapy. How will I handle this acceptance of my black brethren? How will this be accepted back home? That was a real concern. It was very genuine. And we had black and white serving together, you know. It was, at that time, in my medical assignments, this was no problem at all. There was, if there is ever total acceptance, regardless of race, that was it. But that was a real concern. So we spent a lot of time talking about that, both in the group sessions and in individual sessions. Does that answer your question?
Sure. Unless there's anything more that you care to add.
Well, a little personal note that I, as a social worker, experienced. My soldier patients could not believe I was then a lowly private. A little later, I moved up to PFC, private first class. But I was not a commissioned officer. One thing that my patients as a group and individually couldn't understand, how can you, as a private, be in charge of 35 patients in this barracks and in the treatment program generally? So I said, well, that's what I am. I said, now, when you graduate from a school of social work, graduate program, upon graduation, you either automatically become a second or first lieutenant or captain. Automatic. But this was not automatic when I was in service. I went in as a PFC. So they thought I was an officer in disguise. They could never accept that I was really a lowly PFC. And they referred to me as Sarge. Sarge Reiman. I said, okay, whatever you want to call me, but I'm really a private. Like many of them were, of course.
Yeah.
And this was part of the acceptance part that I found that very healthy in the military. There was much more personal acceptance when they were confronted with the common, quotes, enemy, than in the population generally. What do I care whether he's black or white, as long as he and I are working together as a fighting unit? That's great. I don't care what color he is, where he came from. I don't give a damn about his background. How are he and I working together in the military? And that was very, very good. That was nice to hear and observe. And I observed in their social relationships, in their drinking parties, there was no discrimination.
So, what would you say were the most effective aspects of that program? Was it the group building? Was it the ability to articulate their experience? What were the most healing aspects of the program?
Well, first of all, it was getting them out of a traditional medical setting where you use all the medical specialties, which is great when they are needed and appropriate, but getting them out of the traditional hospital atmosphere into a barracks setting. You're all too young, except you, to remember the CCC.
Yeah.
Well, many of these people remembered physically about the 3 C's and that they lived in barracks. So, getting them out of a traditional medical setting, that was basic, and interrupting the everlasting medical circle. They went through this when they were evacuated, and it started a circle. They would be transferred from this hospital to this hospital, internationally and at home. So that was basic, getting them into an old, clean CCC barracks. Plus the availability, and Fort Sam was rich in resources, therapeutically, athletically, you name it. Fort Sam Houston had it, and I said it was more like a country club than a fort as we traditionally think. So you get them out of that medical vicious circle, you put them into, at least the barracks were clean, they were well fed, they could be congenial. A lot of the therapy came from their exchange of experiences. Well, I thought I had it bad, but God, from what you tell me, that's nothing. This kind of exchange, plus the ease of availability of a skilled, trained social worker in presenting lecture topics such as I outlined as a way to provoke discussion and emptying the boil the festering boil. If you want to get rid of it, you have to talk about it. And we, as trained social workers, are here to help you in any way we can. I didn't mention resources that they could call upon back home, social work and other resources that would be helpful in continuing their rehabilitation. I think I mentioned, fortunately, that after we had treated them as best we could, most of them, fortunately, were discharged. They didn't have to go back to service, which was, as I told you, part of my conflict. Am I getting you well to send you back to the hell that you came from? That was a real personal and professional conflict, which I tried to handle professionally.
Well, it's been very interesting to hear your story and your thoughts about it, and we appreciate you very much taking time to think through this and share it with us.
I meant to mention in the introduction that in my presentation and in the interaction to follow, I want to be a stimulator and not a suffocator.
Yeah.
I want to help stimulate what I can through your patient listening and your excellent questions. I wanted to be a stimulator, an interactor in the process, and not the person who has all the magical answers.
Well, you've succeeded quite well in that.
Which is part of my philosophy as a war resister. Part of my philosophy is making maximum use of yourself and the people around you in experiences such as this. So, what burning questions are still out there? This is the damn good book, by the way.
Yeah, I think
It's out of print,
I'll
but
take a
should
look
be
at
in the
that.
school library.
Yeah.
Strategies. It was in the exhibit case for a long time, but I understand they got rid of the exhibit case.
I have a question. In working with your patients, with the soldiers, what things did you try to keep in mind in working with them that made you a more helpful clinician?
Well, basically, I tried to, even though I had 35 of them, I tried through the therapy sessions, both individual and group, to understand them as best you can with 35 people living under these circumstances, to respect them as an individual person. Each of them had individual developmental experiences as well as experiences as a soldier. So that was basic to me to empathize with them, to try to understand them as they had developed early and especially during their military experience. That was basic. Plus sharing in whatever way I could. And I used a lot of films. I knew films and I respected films, and even 70 years ago there were some excellent mental health films. And I used those as well as, I tried to make every experience while they were with me, 6 weeks to a couple of months, a positive experience, as well as introducing them to other resources on this vast Fort Sam Houston campus. And in addition to Brook Convalescent Hospital, there was an abundance of resources on the Fort campus and in the community. So I tried to convey that knowledge to them.
What sustained you during that time? I mean, living in the barracks with your clients, that's a great deal of responsibility, and I assume would be emotionally draining. What sustained you during that time? What helped you?
The letter that I gave you copies of, I think I explained how difficult it is to convey what this experience meant to me personally. But I got a lot of personal satisfaction out of helping these guys, horrible as their experiences had been, to make at least a partial recovery. So that was very satisfying to me personally and professionally. And that I could relate to them as someone who needed my services and who could do a lot of them, not all of them. I've told you about the positive experiences. Part of the frustration was with all of this and the setting and the compassion and the caring, there were some people which you just couldn't reach, no matter what you did or the wonderful place where they were living for a little while. Well, I enjoyed all the resources. I had access to one of the most marvelous swimming pools that I have experienced, which I used frequently. And do you know San Antonio? It's a colorful city. And it has great drinking establishments. I enjoyed my drinking buddies. But what I started to say what I didn't get into the letter was, what was I going to say? Well, you can't convey all of the satisfactions that came. I was so lucky. First of all, my life was spared. That's basic. I know I wouldn't be here talking with you whether I went, and oh, the rumor about the medics was, even though they were unofficially unarmed, many of them carried and used arms, medical personnel. But, well, survival, that I'm here to talk about it. And I've been able to incorporate it in teaching, and in writing, and in films. That's been very satisfying. And the reason that letter that you saw got written, I should have kept a diary with photographs of my patients. I should have kept a diary of the things that they were telling me about the horrors that they had lived through and that brought them to the hospital. I knew I should be recording this, but I didn't. And the reason was, I guess, it was so damn painful to hear what they were bringing individually and through the groups and through just knowing them. This was so emotionally draining for me that I couldn't add to it by keeping a diary. That's my explanation. And finally, in the middle of the experience, I said, I've got to try to set this down. And that's how the letter that you have seen got produced 70 years ago. I just sat down at the typewriter and tried to talk about the patients, the setting, the hospital, the techniques that we used, and the resources available to help with their rehabilitation. That's how the letter got produced. And untidy as I am, as my daughter will attest to, for a long time, the dining room next door and the table for at least 10 years, the table was unusable because I had all this and much more clutter, not just on top of it, but underneath them, the table, in boxes. And with my several frailties, which in addition to the hearing deficit I won't talk about, but I couldn't move the damn boxes because they were too heavy. And I had to give up one of my hobbies, and that is I'm an old car collector. I had a collection of up to 5 rather attractive old cars. And I tried to pick unusual cars, not just Model A and Model T Fords and the like, but cars that were unusual, like a Dodge Wayfarer Roadster, which you've never heard about. But they only made 300 of them. They had lift-out, it was a true roadster. They had lift-out plastic windows that you stored behind the seat. You couldn't roll them up or down. You were either in or you were out. But that was the type of car I collected. And I had a 67 Barracuda convertible.
Oh yeah, that's a great car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were a Mopar man.
I'm a Mopar man.
Yeah.
Chrysler had and still have, the engineering. They're just not good at promoting their product. That's my understanding. But that wasn't part of
It's okay.
support at
That's
that time.
interesting, though.
Yeah.
It's been helpful since then.
In closing, can you
I had to
say
give them all up. I sold all my
Had to give
collector
them all up,
cars.
yeah.
Right. In closing, do you have any words to younger activists or advocates for peace on how to sustain such a full, resilient career?
With the help of peace studies. And that's why I say peace studies, as well as other departments, should be researching what we have tried to cover in a few hours this afternoon. What were the alternative services in the state hospitals? In what volume? What were other types of services? I tried to go to Puerto Rico as, they had, again, the historic peace churches had other types of services, including building latrines in Puerto Rico, and like they're doing in the Unitarian Church is doing it in Honduras right now. What was I saying? Well, first of all, peace studies should be much more active in researching peace activities, the kinds, the places, what worked, what didn't work. This is one experience. How often has this been repeated? And how much is in service today? But if you have students who want to give peace a chance type of person, they have to have information. And that's where peace studies, through research and through the use of students in gathering the research, you can inform people who show even a glimmer of wanting to be more peace active. What is the process of becoming, if there is a draft? Again, we've had what, 2 of them? We may have another one. Of being available as advisors. How do I register as a conscientious objector? What is the process? What's the paperwork? Where can I get help with this? Those are real live things that should be of interest to students. And it was why I was disappointed after I finished my tour of duty as an editor. I didn't know it's still being published, Peace Talk. You say it is being published?
As far as I know it is, it might have taken a new
Well, it
name.
became a slick journal,
Yeah.
and that survived 2 issues.
Mm.
It was just another slick journal,
Mm-hmm.
of which we have too many
Mm.
in academia. There are too many slick journals.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to make Peace Talk a lively, real, living journal written by people who are activists and advocates, not excluding others. One of the guys who contributed, and I won't mention the name, had worked for years with the State Department in some rather dubious kinds of activities.
How did you get him to participate?
And I said, could you write about this? And he said, I can write about some of it. Some of it I can't write about, and I don't wish to write about it. But he suffered through about 6 drafts before he would release that to me for publication in Peace Talk. And there were other people with similar backgrounds who had, well, they had stories to tell, which they needed to tell, but they couldn't. Just as war resistors are reluctant to talk about their experiences. That's why I emphasize, if you don't remember anything else about this presentation, remember my major theme, which is not original, it's somebody else's soundbite: give peace a chance. And my sub-theme, social work saved my life. And that's why I can talk with you now.
Good.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you very